Can I be my authentic self, even if I'm not like the rest of you? If I don't think like you, I don't look like you, I don't have the same interests as you, is there a culture in place? And when I say culture, a lifestyle in place that I can just be me without consequence, socially, physically, emotionally, whatever.
No time, no tools, big expectations. How do you transform school culture without derailing the train? Answer: little wins that bring big changes. The flywheel effect. Harnessing the power of momentum to create a school culture that celebrates change and drives itself.
Hello and welcome to the Flywheel Effect. My name is Jordan Pruitt. I'm here with my co-host Anna Murphy. We're both former educators working with the Live School team to support your school's culture vision. Today we're joined by Baruti Kafele, better known as Principal Kafele. Principal Kafele is a highly regarded educator from New Jersey. As a middle and high school principal, he had the turnaround of 4 different schools. He's now one of the most sought after school leadership and classroom equity speakers in all of the country. Sir, absolute honor to be speaking with you today. Before we jump into questions and that kind of thing, I want to give everybody a chance to introduce yourself, tell us how your summer's going, and all those kind of things.
Yeah, good to be here with the two of you. The summer, it was an interesting summer. It wasn't unlike any other summer. It was just it's just being on the road pretty much every day, 5 states a week, every week, not knowing where you are when you wake up the next morning, but having a good time, just working with educators, helping educators to take their game to another level. So that's it's pretty much how it's spent. And then September, I get to take it down a little bit and enjoy life outside of the work.
5 states a week. What was your favorite state you visited?
I think my favorite state as a speaker is Alabama, because there's just so much history there that I like to revisit and revisit and revisit. So that's probably my favorite state because I can kind of depart from the work and take in a little bit of that history, and I gain a little bit of strength every time I go and visit that history. So it just makes me stronger.
Oh, very cool. So I found you because I was actually in the audience of one of those talks. It's been a few years now. You were at the Innovative School Summit in Vegas. I heard you speak. It was a great lineup. You really stuck out to me. And like whenever we started this deal with Live School, we were going to do a podcast, I made a list of like the folks like, all right, we were asking these folks to come on and you were at the top of the list.
Oh, like, wow.
We're going to try to get him to come on. He's awesome. And
I'm honored.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
I ask everybody this question because this is always a fun one and it goes in different directions. So you're somebody who's been teacher of the year, principal of the year. You've had turnarounds at schools and you've made national news and all these things. What was your very first job in education?
Very first job was in 1988, Brooklyn, New York City. 5th grade teacher, started in November. So the year had already begun because the teacher that I replaced had transitioned. He had died and there was an opening and I stepped in. He was a very popular teacher with the students over the years. So it wasn't easy because they were grieving. And I had to try to win them over, an inexperienced teacher who had never taught a day in his life. But it turned out to be a very rewarding year. And because of that year, I stayed in it and went on and taught 7 years before becoming a 14-year principal. But that first year was a great year. That's where it all started.
That is an extraordinarily tough situation to step into if you've got because elementary teachers, like there's a strong bond with all of your teachers, but like specifically the elementary teacher because you're with them all day and the kids are younger and all those kind of things. That's a tough task.
Yeah, absolutely. But it helped me to become better because I started off with an enormous challenge. As opposed to coasting and then meeting challenges later on, I stepped into a challenge. So it just made for better preparation for what lied ahead in this journey called education.
I always like starting there because everybody has a different journey and it all starts and I think most folks would think, well, you apply to a job and you get it and like there's this normal cycle of things in education, but it's almost never the case. Like you start mid-year or you start right before school starts or like your first job was a sub or you were interim somewhere for a while. It's just interesting that I think a lot of the folks that listen, it gives them a connection. You know what I mean? Like, this is somebody who's done all these great things, and here I am just starting teaching, and it kind of it grounds them a little bit in the conversation. That's why I like starting there. So we talk about school culture. It's the flywheel effect. That's the idea. We talk about little wins and how can we take those and make big impacts in school culture. I think for somebody who's spoken to as many educators as you, and you've done school turnarounds and these kind of things, what's the great indicator of school culture?
Well, when I walk into a building, whether it be my own schools that I led or schools that I'm working with, culture is probably the first thing that I'm really looking at, trying to gauge. I'm walking through the front entrance and I'm asking myself, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? And what is the experience? And that's just being in that front lobby. The way I'm greeted by whomever, the secretary, the security officer, whomever is there at that front entrance, and I'm gauging all that. And then as I walk that initial hallway, corridor, same thing. What am I seeing as I walk? What am I hearing? What do I feel emotionally? And what is this overall experience? So for me as a practitioner, that drove the way I went about leading the shaping of culture. What are young people and staff going to see throughout the course of the day? What are they going to hear beyond teaching and learning? What's going to be the emotion? Am I going to feel like this is a place that I want to be? Do I feel emotionally secure, safe in this environment? Can I be my authentic self, even if I'm not like the rest of you? If I don't think like you, I don't look like you, I don't have the same interests as you, is there a culture in place? And when I say culture, a lifestyle in place that I can just be me without consequence, socially, physically, emotionally, whatever. And then the experience. Is the experience such that when I think back upon it, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years from now, that I could say that experience was a great experience? It's like you and I can go to a concert, we can go to a sporting event, we can go to a play, whatever it is, to the theater. And certain plays or certain theater experiences, certain sporting events, certain concerts, we may have enjoyed it, but we may not think about it for a long time. But then there's that other concert that we went to, we were at the concert, but 20, 30 years later, we're still thinking about the experience because the experience was that good, was that pleasant. It gave us a good feel. That artist understood how to create that magic. And one of the artists that I think about when I use that analogy, there are two. One is Luther Vandross, and he was an artist who was on the stage by himself, not with background singers and the band. They're always to the side when he's in an arena. He's just on the stage by himself, but he created magic. The other one was Elton John. And although he does have the band on the stage, he had a way of creating magic where that entire 20,000 seat arena is one in that moment. And when I think about that, when I thought about it as a practitioner, but when I think about it now as a consultant, I'm saying to the leader, I'm saying to the teacher, what is it about being in your space in that time that you are creating an experience that is magical, that is memorable, that the youngster can grasp and embrace and take along with him or her for the rest of their lives. And that's the difference between that culture that is everlasting and that culture that was problematic, that was toxic, but wasn't conducive to that youngster having that willingness to be his or her best self.
So there's some things you said there that stuck out, and they almost provide a link to some of our other episodes. Some other folks have said a few things that I want to tie back there. The first word that stood out was the idea of safe, and how that's how that provides the conditions for learning. Like, do I feel safe there? Do I feel like I can be me? That's a big deal. Wherever you are, that's a big deal, and that's in every school. The other thing I kept coming back to was the idea of an experience. And we did an episode with another guy, and he said, he had the quote, if they don't want to be there, they're not going to learn there. And you were talking about Elton John and those things, and I was thinking about all the concerts I've been to. Like, I've got a few concert tickets I framed. I've got some that I really, it would take me a long time to remember if I ever went. You know what I mean? It was just, I was probably there, but so that's what we should be striving for. And one more gentleman we talked to from Philadelphia, and he's a K through 8 school, and they have an alumni base there for a K through 8 school, which I thought was really cool. And that was that whole idea of trying to create a lifelong experience for somebody in middle school. And that I thought that was a good tie-in. Those places that are doing it right are doing what you said there. They're trying to create a safe space for students and for staff, and they're trying to create this lifelong experience that makes you remember where you were, why you were there, makes you want to be there. Those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Those spaces matter. And I was always conscious of that. As I always say, we teach children first and content secondarily. So if my focus is going to be on children, I have to make sure that children are in an environment where they can, in fact, embrace the content, because I feel that emotional safety, security, freedom while I'm in that space.
Do you find, and I'm particularly taken by the idea of turning a school around. I just think that's really cool as an educator. That's like the toughest thing you can do. You know what I mean? There are places it's easier than others, those kind of things. Do you find that those are the first things you fix, or those things fix as a result of other things?
No, it's that's the end result. There's a multiplicity of things within the school that got it to the point that it's at presently. So there's got to be a needs assessment and just analyze everything about that school. What's going on here? And that's from A to Z. And as we begin to dissect whatever those areas are and focus our energy on what it is we want those areas to become, then as we bring those various pieces together, then we'll start seeing this turnaround occurring before our eyes. But the turnaround is the end goal. But there are these stair steps that one has to walk in order to get there. So it takes time. It requires synergy. So there's a lot of people working together, but it also requires leadership. So that's me in my role, but it doesn't mean that I'm doing everything, because I've got human capital around me. I've got human resources around me who have various different talents that I don't have. And it's tapping into those folks in terms of what their skill sets are, and us coming together and ultimately being that turnaround school. So therefore all the different parts doing their part toward getting there.
And as you think about those turnaround schools, I think people have different perspectives of them, right? What do you think is maybe the most misunderstood part of being a turnaround school? What do you think people get wrong when they think about them?
Probably the focus on assessment scores. I understand as a leader the significance of the scores being high. It's very political. However, I'm an educator, and I know that a test score is not the only measure of the greatness of a youngster. So I think that where we get it wrong is by putting all the energy, all the effort into the test score, raising the test score, but the student is still the same student he or she always was. We just figured out how to pass a test. And I think that's where we get it wrong, because it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago. The focus in that regard is on content and test preparation as a byproduct. And the youngster becomes secondary, if not tertiary. So we've got to make sure that the focus is always on children. So I think that's probably the main place. Yeah, the school is celebrated. It's in the newspaper as a high performing school, or the magazine, or whatever the case, an award. But those children may not be the ones who are gaining from all that. It might be the leadership, the district, the teachers, but it may not necessarily be the children.
I think there's a good way to frame those scores as they shouldn't be your product. They should be kind of a byproduct of doing the right things. But the graduate, that kid, his success, her success, that's the product. That's what you're
Yeah,
striving for, and
that's
the
it.
test scores will go up because you did those things.
That's right. If you're doing all the things that you should be doing, then like I always say, see, attitude is my thing, and I say transform the attitude, and the content will take care of itself. The children are brilliant. And if we as the adults have that understanding that they're brilliant, if we believe that they're brilliant and treat them as if they're brilliant, then the content will take care of itself. But the youngster can walk into a school with an attitude of apathy, justifiably so, particularly when you understand the world that youngster is coming from every day. So that youngster could be coming from a world that is particularly overwhelmingly challenging. And now you expect me to come into a classroom and to be excited about whatever the content area is. And I'm saying, nah, wait a minute. Have you examined the environment this youngster is coming from every day? And you're expecting this youngster to walk in here super motivated? That's not real world. But if we can create an environment that is not reflective of the environment the youngster may be coming from, because I don't want to paint with a broad brush and say they're all coming from a tough environment, but that youngster, if I can create an environment that's the antithesis of that environment, that's inviting, and that youngster feels that sense of hope and promise because of the environment, which is inclusive of the people in the environment, then there's a higher probability that we can make those connections in the classroom, in the school, because we have created an oasis that is very different from the world that youngsters coming from.
That goes back to that idea about a safe school, and how that has a lot of different meanings. Like, do I feel comfortable here? Do I feel like this place is for me? We had another guy on who said he had a real good quote about brick and mortar versus mirrors. Like, our kids should see themselves in the school. I mean, they should feel like it was for them, not a place that was built that they have to go to. A place that was built for them. This is their place.
Got to see themselves. That's why I keep this nearby. This is I say to every audience, 'cause I keep one with me on every speaking engagement, that this is the most potent tool in my toolkit, because it symbolizes self-reflection. It symbolizes self-assessment. It symbolizes self-adjustment, and it symbolizes self-improvement towards self-actualization. This is it right here. And there's a lot of schools now that use these because their principals have heard me preach these sermons about them. And then they go and buy these mirrors for their staff and use them symbolically to talk about the significance of self-reflection, of looking at oneself and growing as a result of who you see within the reflection.
So we are on a YouTube. So it's a video podcast, but a lot of our listeners will be on Spotify and Apple Podcast. For those that are listening in their cars on the way to school or on the way home, I do got to say that he was ready with a mirror, unprompted, ready to go right there.
Yeah, that mirror. I don't go anywhere without it. I got quite a few of them, and because they're so important, and I know definitively that there are a lot of us in this business that do not understand the potency of the mirror, and it is very potent, because in the world of sports, there is no such thing as practicing for the next opponent without studying the game film first. It's just never going to happen. You watch any interview of an athlete after a game, win or lose, you're going to hear them say, well, we're going to go back to the film, right? They're saying we're going to go back and look at ourselves. We can't prepare for the next opponent until we have deeply examined ourselves. And as we examine ourselves relative to who we were in that game by frame, not just continual movement, but by frame, and dissect it, break it down, now we are in position to practice for the next opponent. So I asked the educator, well, if they put so much stock into film for games, how much do you invest of yourself as it relates to film? How much energy goes into your own film study, which is self-reflection, right? And all that is just carving out time, turning off all the devices, turning off the world, and just taking a deep dive on self-reflection, but then non-judgmentally, but then self-assessment and being your harshest critic, striving to become better based on what you found about yourself.
So you're speaking my language now. Listeners may have heard me say this before. I've been a coach for a long time too. So talking about film review and stuff, you're my wheelhouse there as a football coach for a long time. I've harped on that very note for quite some time. Before we start preparing for them, we got to figure out who we are. Like, it doesn't really do us a whole lot of good to know what they're doing if we don't have an identity ourselves. We got to understand ourselves. To tie that back to teaching and education, I don't know if this is common practice in most states, but in Kentucky, when I started teaching, part of my new teacher induction was was actually a film review, and they had you record a class. And at the time, this has been a while now, it was much harder to film stuff at the time, but you had to go rent a camera and all this stuff. So it was kind of a hassle at the time, but it's probably way easier now. But you had to film yourself teaching a class, and then you watch yourself, and you kind of broke yourself down, and you talked about it, which is, as a new teacher, is one of the more awkward things you could possibly do. It's so rough watching yourself teach that first year, but you can learn an awful lot about yourself just watching how you interact in the class. Like, did you remember how it actually happened?
That is interesting because I've been talking about the mirror for a very long time, but around 2009, when I won the Milken Award, I had various different entities come into the school to film me, because with the Milken, that was a big deal. So they did a profile on me. They followed me with a camera for 2 days, but then other news outlets did the same thing. So they would just follow me around the school for an entire day. So when I began to watch that film, I was stunned by some of the things I saw, because I said, wow, I heard that I did X, Y, and Z, maybe the way I walked, the way I talked, whatever it was. I said, but I didn't internalize it. And now I saw it, and it's like I was embarrassed by things that people were pointing out to me, saying, you need to work on, you need to check, you need to take a look at. And it took me seeing it on film, after it was a film that was published film, for me to say, oh, okay, well, it's there now. That's who I am. So I'm not going to change it. But at least now I see what others were saying, so that film is just that important.
So in the show notes, in the description, I want to tag a YouTube video, because I always do a little bit of prep before talking on one of these. And I think it's the same video you're talking about, but you had, they had some interviews in there that I think are awesome to watch, because they were interviews with your students at the time. And those are the most, the best representations of the job you were doing, because they were talking about how you impacted their lives as a student. And as a principal, you have a lot of impact on folks, but it's tough to have direct impact on somebody as a school principal. And you got that across, it looked like, quite a bit. Outstanding.
Yeah, that was that is one of the videos, and that was something else. To hear the things that they said about me unprompted, whether it be the students, those staff members they interviewed, superintendent, I found it flattering. And I would consider the comments I got from students to be high points of my career, because they didn't have to say the things they said. They didn't even have to go on. They didn't even have to go on camera, but they chose to. And a lot of those youngsters that were on there, I'm still in touch with them via social media, and it's years later, 12 years later. But it was very rewarding to hear them.
Yeah, that's what set it apart from to me was kids are honest, man. They give you genuinely when they say something, they mean it, and that's a big deal to me. I like asking a big picture question to everybody that comes on too, because it could go in whatever direction you want it to go in. But if you got to right one wrong in education, what would you fix?
In education or just in terms of my personal practice?
Either, your choice.
All right. Yeah, in education. I think that, one of the things that really bugs me the most today in today's climate is in many of the states in America, the fear of the word equity. And when I say fear, I mean it without exaggeration. Fear. I'm at a point in my career now, my life, my mission, that I have several clients who will ask me in our pre-meetings, would you please not use the word equity in your presentation? And when I think about the meaning of equity, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but I wrote a book about equity, and I had the audacity to define it. And I said that equity is simply meeting young people where they are, as they are. So I asked the question, what is it? What part of that is it that you fear? What part of that is it that's going to create consequences for you when I leave? Meeting children where they are, as they are. For me, that is just great teaching. So with the question, what would I fix? I would fix the way people are perceiving what equity is, because equity, a lot of people don't understand the origins of equity. Equity has always been a real estate term, the net worth or net value of a home. But somewhere along the way, it made its way into schools and classrooms, and it was a response to the achievement gap. How do we close this gap in achievement, particularly along racial ethnic lines? So there's been a million different solutions. None of them have worked. And then here came equity in around 2012-ish, 13-ish. So people have run with it and used it various different ways. For me, it's meeting the child where the child is, as the child is, which is critical because that child's not coming in as you would want him or her to in all cases. You may want the child to come in at this level, but the child may be coming in at a level that you can't even see on camera. So as teacher, I've got to meet you there. So the thing I would want changed is this perception that equity is the boogeyman, that equity is a four-letter word, that equity is somehow criminal. No, equity is the answer. It's meeting youngsters right there where they are, and then let's build from there.
So I'm glad you said that because I liked how you said that it's just good teaching. Do you know what I mean? Because that should be what you do for every lesson you do, for every class you do. Is what I'm about to this lesson I'm about to present is do all my kids in here have a chance for success based on how I present it? Like you should think about it that way. That is my lesson, is my content, is it the way I'm presenting? Is it appropriate for everyone in the room? Does everyone have the opportunity to be successful? And that is just good teaching. That really shouldn't be controversial.
Shouldn't be. Shouldn't be. So that's probably the top of my list. There's other things, but that's really been bothering me for the past few months now.
So, sir, I followed you on social media for a while. You've wrote a lot of books about a lot of topics and a lot of leadership things. What's the most underutilized resource in schools?
Well, I say the assistant principal, and you probably knew that. I back in 2018 wrote a blog post which had no agenda, just a one in a line of blog posts I've written over the years. It was called The Assistant Principalship, the most misunderstood and underutilized position in all of education. And the difference between that one and at the time, maybe 50 others I had written up to that point, not including articles, was that one went viral. And I said, wow, this little 800, 900,000 word essay, whatever it was, went viral with a lot of people because it probably resonated with a lot of people because folks were probably feeling what I was saying about the way that the assistant principal is being utilized. So when I saw that, I immediately called my publisher and said, I got to turn this blog into a book. And I went on and wrote the Assistant Principal 50. The 50 meaning 50 self-reflective questions, which I put on a lot of books that I write. And it became a bestseller in about, I think, 3 months. And it's still my best-selling book to this day. I've written another one since then, but that's the one. So then went on and created the virtual AP Leadership Academy, which is the high point of my week for the past 126 weeks, where I sit right here or in a hotel or in a convention center somewhere and just talk assistant principal leadership. So I'm saying all that to say that of all the work that I do as a presenter, as a consultant, what is most dear to me is the role of the assistant principal. And I'm on this one person mission to change that. Because when I think about schools and I think about just the dynamics of schools, and you think about this role of the assistant principal, here we're talking about the person that's theoretically the number two person in the building in terms of just authority. And this person being utilized as someone that I could get a high school kid to do, a full-time disciplinarian, full-time lunch duty person, full-time bus duty, full-time ordering supplies or whatever. It's just nothing to do with teaching and learning, nothing to do with in enhancing pedagogy. Now, that's not to say that all assistant principals are in that category, because quite frankly, there are many that principals are able to make expose them to all aspects of leadership, which is inclusive of the instructional side. But there's a whole lot, particularly in urban environments, that is not their reality. They're spending large portions of their day reading disciplinary referrals and making decisions on young people while the teacher continues to teach in the classroom, and they have nothing to do with what's going on in that classroom. So I said, I want to intervene, and I want to make sure that there's some kind of correlation between the role of the assistant principal and the teachers that he or she supervises, right, in terms of their pedagogical development. And when that person only gets into a classroom during observation/evaluation season, then how are you making a valid assessment of this teacher's performance when you've been in there 2 times out of 180 days? You don't know that teacher, and you certainly have nothing to do with that teacher's professional growth and development. You have nothing to do with it. So that's that role for me, and why it's so important for me.
So I hoped you would go in that direction, because that particular topic interests me a lot. I read that blog post. It was, I'm not alone that a lot of people read it, but I found that really interesting. And I kind of thought there's a lot of similarities there in, teaching to that role as AP, and AP is a role to the principal, and even the principal is a role to a super eventually. Like, there's not enough overlap and connection between the roles. They don't really prepare you for the next role. I like what you said there about them not having a big impact on what's happening in the classrooms, because real easily we get carried away with the logistics in the building, forget about what the main purpose of the building is. Everything's going to be supporting the teaching and learning. And if you're only in there 2 times, you're not going to have an accurate picture of how they are as a teacher, but you're also going to have, because there's such a rare variable in there, you actually change the environment of the class when you go in too.
That's right. Yeah, it's those discipline problems that assistant principal may be contending with on a regular basis might be that if you were in the classroom to see what's happening, you could be proactive. Now you can get in front of it, you can get ahead of it before it even occurs, because there could be something happening in that classroom, some kind of dynamic in that classroom that's giving that youngster license to engage in those particular behaviors. But if I'm not in the classroom to observe, it doesn't mean that I'm going to see natural behaviors when I'm in a classroom as one of the administrators. But if I'm in there enough, I'm going to see some things that require some attention, that now teacher and assistant principal can mutually work together to help that teacher to grow in those particular areas.
Yeah, and like you were going there, you don't really even just you create a better relationship with your teachers, which is going to be huge, but you also create a better relationship with the student too. So, like you said, it feels counterintuitive because you're like, well, I've got to handle all these issues, but you're going to have less if you do it that way.
And what advice would you give then to an assistant principal listening to this who wants to evolve their position to fit what you're saying, right? I mean, they obviously report up to a principal, so they don't have a full decision in terms of their scope of work. How can they start to advocate for that shift?
One of the things, and I hope this doesn't come across as self-serving, but one of the things is I would invite them to be a part of the Saturday morning virtual Assistant Principal Leadership Academy, where we're talking about 126 weeks of 90-minute sessions each. I don't know where else you're going to find that. And it's not just me speaking. It's just the multiplicity of guests that I bring onto the format. Some of them world renowned, others lesser known, but have valid information. So I would certainly invite an assistant principal that's not aware of the platform to be on with us every Saturday at 10:55 at Virtual AP Leadership Academy on YouTube, and there's that information there because there's so much to talk about there, and it's in so many different levels in terms of what that assistant principal can do differently. But the bottom line is being able to dialogue with the principal, being able to gauge what it is you don't know, right? Because you may not even know what questions to ask. So being able to gauge that, but that's why I say coming onto the platform so you can learn what some of those questions may be, so that you could go to your principal and say, I'd like to be exposed to this and this, and have more opportunity to do that and that, so that if this person is in fact an aspiring principal, well, let's prepare this person for the principalship now as an AP, not throw you into the principal seat later on and you know nothing about leadership outside of discipline and lunch duty, right? So, but you got to know which kinds of questions to ask, depending on what kind of principal you have. If you got a principal that's focus is on making you great, then it's not an issue. It's a non-issue. But everybody's not blessed with that principal.
And so I know we're almost out of time for the recording. So this leads me to what my question was going to be as a follow-up to this. And we'll link it in the show notes as well. Where can people find that? You said it's on YouTube. Do they just put in the title you shared? What's the best way to access that?
Yeah, it's actually on 5 different platforms.
Oh.
But it's on YouTube at Virtual AP Leadership Academy. And it's on Facebook at Virtual AP Leadership Academy. But it's also at Principal Kafele on Twitter, okay, at Principal Kafele on Facebook, and at Principal Kafele on LinkedIn. All of those live at 10:55 Eastern Time.
Love it. We'll link all of those in the show notes for everyone too who's listening, so they can easily access it.
Absolutely. I'll put all that there, including the video we referenced earlier. And I'll tie it back, because we'll have quite a few listeners who are teachers as well, who they're interested in getting into principalship. Maybe they want to be a dean. Maybe they want to do something.
That's what it was for. It's for the aspiring leader as well.
And I think you even have at least a few episodes. It's either that channel or a different one that's even on interview tips and interview questions. Am I right?
Those videos are on that channel. I didn't do the assistant principal videos live, because at the time I did those particular videos, I didn't know I was going to create this channel. That channel was created because in the midst of the beginning stages of the pandemic. So, it's like I'm home. Let me give myself something to do while I'm home, and created something that I didn't know was going to take off the way it did. But those 2 videos for the APs, there are literally thousands of people across America and different parts of the world who are in those positions, as they tell me, because they watch those videos. So those 2, and then there's a principal interview video that's part of the live. So it's on that channel, Virtual AP Leadership Academy. It's just people have to kind of search for that because it's somewhere embedded in the middle.
I can endorse those as well. I watched those during about that same time. And
Oh,
they
okay.
helped me out.
Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
Sir, we know how busy you are, and we thank you so much for coming on.
I thank you.
I think we just listed most of the places folks can find you. Anna, we got anything before we go?
We're good. I'm really looking forward to this episode coming out. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me just give the website though, principalkafele.com. Once again, principalkafele.com, and they can find everything there, including all those links I was saying.
The flywheel effect, harnessing the power of momentum to create a school culture that celebrates change and drives itself.